Good morning, we're Group 1 and today we're going to present to you the benefits of bilingualism in executive control system, a study conducted by Ellen Bialystok. First of all, we have to clear out what bilingualism is. Bilingualism is the phenomenon of speaking and understanding two languages. The term can refer to individuals as well as to an entire society. Sometimes bilingualism is confused with multilingualism, which is incorrect because multilingualism is the speaking and understanding of more than two languages, and bilingualism of only two. There are various types of bilingualism. The first one, called early bilingualism, has two types. Simultaneous early bilingualism, which refers to a child who learns two languages at the same time and has a bilingual language development from birth. This produces a strong bilingualism called additive bilingualism. And the second type, called successive early bilingualism, which refers to when a child who has already partially acquired a first language then learns a second language early in childhood. Another type of bilingualism is called late bilingualism, which refers to when the second language is learned in adolescence or adulthood, generally after the age of 6 or 7. It's a bilingualism that occurs after the acquisition of the first language. This is after the childhood language development period. Next, we have additive bilingualism, which refers to the situation where a person has acquired the two languages in a balanced manner, a strong bilingualism. Also, we have subtractive bilingualism, which refers to a situation where a person learns the second language because of the deterioration of the first one, especially if the first language is a minority one. In this case, mastery of the first language decreases, while the other language, the dominant one, increases. Finally, we have passive bilingualism, which refers to when a person is able to understand a second language without being able to speak it. Who is Ellen Bialystok? Ellen is a recognized professor of psychology at York University. She has a whole research about behavioral and neuroimaging methods to see effects of bilingualism on cognitive processes across the lifespan, from childhood to adulthood. Why bilingualism? After studying for a PhD in cognitive development, Ellen started working in a project on how people learn second languages. This topic hadn't been studied in the field of psychology. Ellen Bialystok was one of the first ones. Through her research, she has discovered and identified differences in the development of essential cognitive and language abilities for bilingual children, the use of different brain networks in monolingual and bilingual young adults while performing simple conflict tasks, and the postponement of symptoms of dementia in bilingual older adults. In her study, Reshaping the Mind, the Benefits of Bilingualism, Ellen starts with the idea that everything we do leaves a trace in our brain. For her, bilingualism is the ideal experience in which to study the previous notion because of two reasons. First, bilinguals don't self-select, life made them so. And second, because language use is our most sustained activity and nothing we do comes close to it. But who is bilingual? Bilingualism is not a categorical variable, it's a continuum. That's why most people are localized between monolinguals and bilinguals, as you can see in the presentation. We shouldn't ask who is bilingual. Instead, we should ask how bilingual are you? So, what do we know about bilingualism? The mind works like this. When you see something, for example, a chair, you simply label it conceptually as a chair. But when you're bilingual, the mind generates both labels, chair and silla, creating conflict. There's a system in the brain responsible of handling conflict. It is called the executive control system. This system comes into place and adjudicates between these two jointly linguistic options. That's why every time a bilingual tries to say something, the executive control system is changed. The executive control system is responsible for three important things. The first one is called inhibition and selection, and it is when, for example, You're looking for someone in a crowded place, and in order to find that person, you have to inhibit, select, and focus. The second one is called shifting and multitasking, and is how we divide our attention so we can do more than one thing at a time. And the last one is called working memory. It's when you hold a thing in mind and move it around without forgetting what it was. We have to take into account three important things. The first one is that the executive control system is the last cognitive system in the brain to develop. And the second one is that it evolves through childhood, peaks in young adulthood, and then begins to decline. In her study, Ellen wants to prove that in bilinguals, the executive control system is in constant use, so it ends up modifying its networks connections, making them stronger.
In this research, it was found that in the group of middle-aged adults, no significant brain differences were found between bilinguals and monolinguals. The results of the elderly participants showed that bilinguals exhibited the typical symptoms that led to dementia 3 to 4 years later than adults who only communicate in one language. The mechanisms underlying these protections are unclear, but Bialystok explains that bilingualism could be an environmental factor that is contributing to the brain's so-called cognitive reserve. Now, this cognitive reserve can also delay the onset of symptoms in people with dementia. Bilingualism strengthens and protects our brain from infancy to old age, according to the research. The studies carried out by Ellen Bialystok show that living with two languages does not make us smarter, but it does make us more effective and decisive in our daily lives. Also, in addition, it stands out that with age, bilingualism delays the onset of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. The most obvious cognitive advantage of bilingualism, according to the research, is that children with this ability develop more and better one of the most important cognitive systems of the brain, which is called the executive control system. This system is located in the frontal lobe and allows us to pay attention to what is most important. It also avoids being distracted by things that do not have a priority in the moment, and this facilitates multitasking and helps keep more information in the mind. The executive control system develops during most of childhood, and in this phase, bilingualism intervenes in a very positive way because it involves continuous brain gymnastics. If you are bilingual, you have to use this system all the time to attend to the language you are speaking at the time. Bilinguals use this all the time. For example, when using a word in a certain language, you'll have to discriminate the word from the other language you also know. That's why the research explains that bilingualism improves executive control because speaking two languages requires attention at all times, and since they are both interacting in your head, you need to use one and make sure the other doesn't interfere. For this reason, the author assures that the more developed and exercised we have our system, the more efficient we will be in our daily activities because we will be prepared to carry out several tasks at the same time. Another important part of the research states that the brain needs to keep exercising to work properly. Because of this, the research helps prove that speaking more than one language has very positive effects on our health, showing that from improving our attention span to delaying the onset of Alzheimer's disease symptoms, the most important finding was when comparing the aging in a population of bilinguals and monolinguals, the result was concluded that bilinguals felt the first signs of Alzheimer's disease later than monolinguals. This is because of what we have previously exposed, which is that in a bilingual mind, languages are active all the time and they, as the author says, somehow compete, and this competition becomes a permanent way of exercising for the brain. And that's the key to the mental health benefits of bilingualism, taking into account that the executive system in a bilingual person is better exercised, and in old age it can function as a mechanism that delays symptoms of mental illness.
In order to illustrate the performance differences between monolingual and bilingual participants on executive control tasks, a set of 3 experiments was made. Those experiments were based on different paradigms that engage different aspects of executive control, and they also include participants from different ages in order to show all the stages in the lifespan. They all will be explained all along the presentation and includes global or local level of a set of hierarchical stimuli, images and animals, and the Stroop effect. The first experiment was composed of a set of 3 studies in 50 children. 25 were bilingual and the other 25 monolingual, whose ages were around 6 years old. They all had to perform a task that requires attending to either the global or local level of a set of stimuli. The stimuli was created out of letters or shapes, and they all performed comparably on cognitive background measures. The general idea of the experiment was that from a general stimuli they had to press a key if there was shown an S or another key if there was shown an H. The same happened whether there was a circle or a square. In order to a better understanding of the result, there was a control condition in which the stimuli were simple presentations of the individual letter or shape, such as is shown in the slide. In this control case, the results shown that both bilingual and monolingual perform similarly, which means that they choose correctly and identically. However, when there was present a mixed box of both congruent and incongruent trials of hierarchical stimuli, such as shown on the slide, a change in the evidence was present. Again, they were asked to press a key if it was an S or another key if it was an H, but in this case they had to decide whether to look at the big letter or the small one. Because of that, this kind of stimuli made demands on all core components of the executive control system, creating the possibility of isolating the source of the bilingual advantage in executive control. So, as it is shown on the graph, when there was presented the mixed box with both congruent and incongruent trials of hierarchical stimuli, a faster and efficient response was presented by bilingual children. Finally, with the results of this experiment, it was shown that bilinguals outperformed monolingual children in conditions where controlled attention was required. Also, there was an evidence that proved that the conflict between the two possible responses is resolved more efficiently by bilingual children, which can be attributed to the fact that because there is a joint activation of the two languages for bilinguals, there is a constant need to manage attention and resolve conflicts which evoke executive control system. This causes that executive control system connects itself more deeply into language areas, which makes the network to become more robust, and it all causes a more efficient system.
Hi, I'm Isabella, and as my partner Paula mentioned earlier, Ellen Bialystok designed 3 experiments that will illustrate the performance difference between monolingual and bilingual participants on executive control tasks. She has already told you about experiment number 1, and I'll tell you about experiment number 2, which we renamed Images and Animals. So for this experiment, 60 kids were tested that were 8-year-olds. 30 of them were monolingual and 30 of them were bilingual. To make sure that all results were reliable, they were matched on background measures. So the experiment was based on 3 tasks, and the first task was pictures will appear to kids, and they had to use a respawn key to decide if the picture was of an animal or a musical instrument. In this case, as you can see, we have a panda or a guitar. Okay, so now for the second task, kids now were presented with a sound either by an animal or by a musical instrument. So it could be a dog barking or a cow mooing, or a violin recording or a piano recording. And this time they had to classify the sound as animal or music through a microphone. Then the third task was to respond to less tasks simultaneously, meaning they were presented with a sound and a picture and had to respond to both stimuli. They could respond in either way they preferred, but had to answer both classifications. So as you can see the results in figure 2, For tasks 1 and 2, all participants, monolingual and bilingual kids, performed the task with equivalent accuracy. These tasks were the ones where they had a picture and they had to classify it by pressing a key, or where they hear a sound and had to say the word animal or sound or music. Now, for the task number 3, which was a dual task condition where they had the sound and picture at the same time, bilingual children were significantly more accurate than monolingual children, which we can see in the bar graph. The explanation for this is that to succeed in dual task, it's required for executive control to allocate the attention in two tasks and being able to shift attention as the tasks occur. So as my first partner had explained, the conflict between the executive control when you have a bilingual, when you have a word and you have to think about the language you're going to use, is the same ability that was used in this type of experiment between when you were listening to a sound and classifying it while when you were seeing an image and classifying. So now for experiment number 3, it was based on the Stroop effect. Participants were younger and older adults, monolingual and bilingual, to see differences in this task. So the task participants were asked to do was tell the ink of the color of the word that was shown. So in this case, the control condition would be the blue word with the blue ink, and the experiment condition would be blue word, but now with an orange ink. For example, here we have another try. So first we see the red word with the red ink, and then comes the red word, but now with the green ink. The idea of the participant would be to say first blue, then orange, then red, and then green as fast as they could to measure the results. Now, the results for the experiment I've mentioned before, the Stroop effect, can be seen in the graph at the right of the presentation. So here we have a difference between the young adults and the older adults, but we can see that monolingual younger adults and monolingual old adults have a higher response time. This means they took more time to actually say the correct ink color of the word that was shown. We can see this difference in both ages, and the explanation for this is that Stroop task is a classic test for the executive control. So actually mine is conflicted between the word that's reading, that it is shown, and the word is reading, and the actual color of the word that is shown. So it has to allocate the attention between what he's saying and the actual knowledge it has.
For this part of the presentation, we think it's very important to understand how the protection of the brain works. We have seen now a few studies that understand that bilinguals are successful in holding memory impairments, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease as long as the executive control system is intact. But it is important to question ourselves. How does our brain look like when this happened? To answer this, it is important to relate or to see a field of study called cognitive reserve, which concentrates in the benefits of exercising the brain. We have all heard, hey, read a book, hey, do crossword puzzles. It is good for your brain, and it actually is, because it exercises your brain. But now it is important to relate that to how memory impairment can work. The idea of cognitive reserve is very clear. Nonetheless, the mechanisms of cognitive reserve are highly controversial. As Ellen Bystocks presents, there are 2 great fields of study that support each one of them to different positions about this mechanism. The first one, we called it brain resists. What they support is that the brain becomes more robust. The brain becomes fortified. So when those beta amino plaques start to work their way into the gray matter of the brain, the tissue of bilinguals is fortified. So this works like a vaccine. For them, the reason why bilinguals are older when they are diagnosed with these types of disease, such as dementia and Alzheimer's disease, is because their brain is more robust. So as Ellen says, it is because their brain has held back the floodgates. The other point of view, we called it brain compensates. This point of view states that the amyloid plaques are going to get in the brain no matter how many languages you speak. But the important part here is that bilinguals have the ability to override the damage caused by the proteins, compensating probably through the executive control system. So, the reasons why bilinguals are older when they show symptoms of diseases such as Alzheimer's is because their brain has the ability to compensate and to cope with the disease. These two perspectives actually predict very different pictures of how might the brain look. If you have two individuals with the same condition, identical age, the same stage of disease, and the same diagnosis, the first perspective will expect bilingual and monolingual brain to look the same as they reach the same stage of disease. But the second model will say that if they appear to be functioning the same, it is because bilinguals are compensating and therefore they have much worse disease, so they will expect their brains to be actually worse. This is a complex argument as it has a counterintuitive logic. What it wants to say is that if you're compensating, it means that you are dealing with much more disease, and you can only see that by studying the brain. When you see the CT scans, you can actually see this. Preliminarily, it is important to note and to say that human brain shrinks and gets atrophy as we age. No matter how much you study, the brain will suffer some atrophy. Being that said, when you look at the brain that has been affected by diseases such as Alzheimer's, and you see the medial temporal lobe, that is the part of the brain that gets affected by these types of disease, you will see that the brain of the bilingual actually has substantially worse atrophy than the one of the monolingual, and this means that the brain of the bilingual is actually coping with more disease. So, to wrap up this argument, it is important to state that bilingualism works as creating a long-term stimuli activity that enhances the executive control networks, and that makes it available for compensating even when the person faces a disease such as Alzheimer's and dementia. Being that said, it is important to say, keep your brain exercised, keep your brain active, keep those networks active. This will lead you to preserve your brain over time and to keep you healthy. These types of diseases are diseases that come and that appear at our late ages. Individuals not normally die from these diseases, but they die from related diseases. So it is very important to promote activities that stimulate the brain, such as being bilingual. As a fun part of the presentation, we brought a case study, Colombia and bilingualism. We researched that EF, Education First entity, actually ranked Colombia in 2020 as a very low proficiency country. By looking at the studies, Colombia has very low levels of bilingualism when it comes to speaking English. By this, we want to say we need as a country to keep the effort to increase the levels of bilingualism in people. This research shows that in the past 2 decades, Latin American countries have made a great effort to improve the levels of bilingualism. Nonetheless, access to English classes is still very limited and uneven among rural and urban areas, as well as women and men among the countries of this part of the world.
So as we've shown in the past slides about the case study of Colombia and bilingualism, we found that Colombia was ranked in 2020 by the EF English Proficiency Index as a very low proficiency country. It actually occupies place 77 in a rank of 100 countries. This is actually very low compared to other Latin American countries like Argentina, which was placed 25th. Also, a study made an article by the University CESI de Colombia called Alzheimer, un problema de salud pública en Colombia, has estimated that by 2020, 342,956 people over the age of 60 will suffer from some type of dementia, and of this past number, 258,498 of them will have Alzheimer's disease. which will be more common in women. It will be more common in women since women actually have less opportunities to have a great education, and that includes English classes. From this, we can conclude that Colombia needs to make a bigger effort to increase the levels of bilingualism, as it helps to increase the levels not only of education and trade in the country, but can possibly reduce the number of cases of Alzheimer's disease and dementia that have been predicted.
In all the experiments presented, we can see three generalizations. The first one is that better performance in executive control tasks is found in all ages across the lifespan. The second one is that the benefits of bilingualism that can be traced are usually seen in nonverbal domains and even scans. And the third one is that bilingual advantage can be seen in better monitoring skills. This happens because the mind of bilinguals is usually competing in what language to speak. This condition is excluded in people that are bimodal bilinguals. These people speak a language and a sign language. In regards to healthcare, bilingualism is a great tool to keep the executive control system young and healthy. We think that in a country like Colombia, where bilingualism levels among the population are very low, needs to do a greater effort to improve that. Finally, we conclude that women and men, as well as people all over Colombia, should have access to an education that provides bilingual programs because of all the benefits it has.